Welcome to episode 16 of gCaptain Live. I am your host, gCaptain founder and CEO John Conrad. Today our episode is the case of the WSF Washington State Ferry versus the idiot boater. I've been doing this a long time, guys, and 1 second here, let me reduce the noise. Be right back. I've been doing gCaptain for a long time, almost 10 years, and I cannot remember a time in recent memory, at least not in the last couple of years, where we have gotten in such vehement disagreement over an article. Now, I have to preface it by saying we often publish articles that get a lot of disagreement and constantly getting thank yous and great job, gCaptains, in my email inbox, as well as a number of emails saying you guys don't know what the hell you're talking about. Now, how do we figure out what the true story is, what we are doing correct? When we publish a story, are we reporting it correctly? Well, we just reported a story about a boat colliding with a Washington State ferry. And the original title of our story was Idiot Boater Hits into Ferry. And I'm the one responsible for publishing the story. I didn't hit publish and write it, but as CEO and founder of gCaptain, it's my responsibility to make sure that the articles are true. And let me tell you, we missed the boat, so to say, on this particular story. We got some of the facts wrong, and I want to explain a little bit about how gCaptain collects its stories, how we make sure that we get the news accurate, and why, how it goes about. Ted says, oh, here comes an apology, question mark. Yes, Ted, there's absolutely going to be an apology on my fault. I do not think in this particular case we got everything wrong, but we definitely got a few things wrong. So if you haven't seen the video, on the title of this is a little bit.ly/, that'll bring you to the video, and we can watch it. I got the screen here. I don't know if this is going to work per se. That's the wrong one. But let me see if I can bring this up on the screen. All right, this is the article I'm talking about. Almost 6,000 shares on Facebook alone, hundreds more on Twitter. And let me see if I can scroll in on this one here so you guys can see it better. And this is the one I'm talking about. So, right here you got the boat, whose name is Nap Time, by the way. And this is the ferry. And as you see, as the boat's coming closer, they are about to collide. Conrad Metzenberg says here, armchair generals weighing in. Yes, and we're going to get to that. Bam! Collision. Luckily, we don't believe anyone was hurt in this particular collision, and we've definitely seen worse ones. But still, a royal mess up. Things went wrong. What in particular went wrong in this case? And let me try to get the camera angle back here. All right, well, we reported originally that it was the fault of the idiot boater. And then when we published it, we had differing opinion. Now, we often, as I say, get differing opinion on gCaptain. Sorry, I'm still working on this sound. Todd here says, see you guys all the time in Puget Sounds with no lookout and running with autopilot, especially in the summer. So we said it was an idiot boater and it's the boater's fault, and we got a lot of feedback saying, hey, this is clearly the ferry's boat. So that's my domain, my responsibility is, hey, did we make a mistake there? Now, one thing since the beginning of gCaptain, I've always been very forward of publishing our mistakes, correcting the articles, and when necessary, posting in a brand new article. And a guy I respect very much said, John, you're completely off base, and he sent me a nasty gram. And I won't divulge the full name of this guy. His first name, Greg. And I said, Greg, okay, tell me where I did wrong. And he said, I'm sorry for sending you this email. No one else saw it. It's just for you. I said, Greg, I'd love to publish this article. I believe more important than my job as a captain and CEO is the fact that we get these news articles right. But the problem I had with Greg is that while I trust this guy and I really believe what he is saying is true and correct, there were other people, mariners that I respect, guys who teach navigation, who know the co-regs a lot better than I do, were saying on the opposite side, saying that the ferry had no culpability here. It was all the boaters' thing. So what do we do when we have two divergent opinions on a particular subject like this video? Well, one option is to publish as little facts, just let the video tell the truth. We sometimes do that if we can't yet determine what's actually going on. Second, we look for other information. One thing we could get here is AIS. We weren't able, a lot of times we can get AIS, we weren't able to get AIS last night and early this morning. So we had experts, people I trust, people I respect, people with masters, unlimited license like myself, saying, hey, the ferry's wrong, and other people I trust saying, hey, the boat was clearly wrong. Now, I got to admit, initially I thought it was all the boat's fault. I was wrong. This is where the apology comes from. And let me see if I can zoom out here. Ted asks, can I get to the point a little quicker? I will try, Ted. So, I'm sorry, I'm having a little camera trouble. Okay, there we go. We got widescreen now. This is a Carnival cruise ship, obviously, but let's pretend it's the ferry. All right, we got the video, as you guys just saw, of the boat coming up to the ferry. All right, the ferry starboard side. Let me get it around and we have the boat coming in like this. All right, and it hit there. That is the assumption I was working on. All right, that was an incorrect assumption. What this vessel has, which I did not know, and how we eventually uncovered the truth behind this, is that this particular ferry has what we call a pickle fork bow. It's an unusual design where the bow is up here and you have this railing across here. So while I and a lot of other mariners around the country thought, let me zoom in on this, thought that the camera was back here and the vessel was headed this way and the collision was around here, where the camera actually was on the port side in this angled view looking that way, and the collision actually happened on the bow. So if I bring this back in, we got the ferry going down and the boat came and the ferry T-boned the boat. All right, so where I had thought that it was an overtaking situation from the perspective of the video, it turns out it was a crossing situation. So rather than overtaking, which would put where the ferry is the stand-on vessel and the boat is overtaking the ferry, this actually turns out to be a crossing situation where the boat was the stand-on vessel and the ferry should have maneuvered around it. Now, how did we figure out this mystery? All right, and it was the angle of this rail on the pickle bow that threw me off. How we eventually figured out where it was and what the solution was. Because again, there were people on both sides of the argument where I trust. Now, we get that a lot when we're investigating stories. Is this true? Who has the right perspective? We often find experts on the different sides of a scenario, and it's just a matter of perspective and biases that they both have the facts right, but they're looking at it a different way. So my job as the editor is say, hey, how are you guys are looking at this? Let's look at it through a new perspective. That's a big secret of gCaptain and how we find this, discover these new stories out. But usually when I'm talking about perspective, it's figurative. I'm talking about a pilot versus a captain. The pilot has a different set of rules and things he looks at than the master of a vessel, or an engineer versus a captain. That's where you usually have communication failure. And most of those communication failures, or the big ones that cause accidents, are between two experts who are looking at the problem in a different way. This is the first case I can remember where the perspective problem wasn't figurative, it was literal. Literally, the camera was on the port side and a bunch of us thought it was on the starboard side. So I was talking with this expert in the Puget Sound, and he was like, man, you are way off base. And for 15 minutes we were discussing it, I didn't see it. And then I said, hey, wait, Greg, where is the camera here? And it turns out the camera's on the bow. That was the problem. I don't know if I'm explaining myself right. It doesn't really matter. But I apologize for getting that wrong. But I also got a lot of criticism for a few other things. One thing is changing the story. So a lot of times with a changing story, we decide to leave the original story intact. And then we kind of highlight it or publish a new story and let you guys see that original story. Well, in this case, we didn't do that. We just erased the title. And the reason why we did that is the original story didn't provide much facts. We called this boater an idiot, and then we weren't sure. It wasn't that we were backing down on our original promise. It was just to prevent the confusion. All right, so that's the reason, and I apologize for that. If it had been a real factual mistake, we would have left it intact and just provided an addendum below, letting you see our original mistake. But because we just called this guy an idiot, we didn't really put facts, the boater, we didn't see the need to do that. But some people called us out on it. Second is the fact that, hey guys, all right, listen, I'm going to tell you a little secret about gCaptain and how we operate, and we get a lot of negative feedback for it, but it's just the way it is. A lot of people read our titles and think that is the truth. We're not in an age of people reading in-depth articles anymore. A lot of people just skim the headlines and make their own assumptions. And we both hate that and we play into it a little bit. Right? So a lot of times, and I'm telling you my secret, I'm being honest here, even though the practice isn't 100% honest, our titles on our story are meant for one thing, to get you interested in the story and come in. Sometimes they're the opposite of the truth. Now, we follow the truth and we want to make sure we publish the truth, and we will go through lengths and apologies and addendums and whatever it takes to get to the bottom of the truth, just not in the title. If we can't get people into the website and to read the article, then we failed at our job, both as mariners, and a lot of mariners will read us anyway, but we have the public opinion. A lot of big stories like this are getting wronged by the media, and people in Washington are saying, hey, what's going on? And they may have a friend that's a mariner, or say, hey, look at what gCaptain has. So it's not just for you guys who are mariners, but just people who are interested in ship and the news in general. We do kind of stunning, sensational headlines with the purpose of getting people into the post so that they can read the facts. So just because the headline says something, if you didn't read the article, you don't have the full truth. You have to read our article. We make no apologies for doing sensational headlines. It's just part of the business in 2016. We have to do it. Will Robinson says the ferry is a double-ender. All right. So how we figured this out, too, is it took me a while. It took me most of the day. But I noticed all the people saying I was wrong was from Washington State, where most of the people I was saying right were from other ports around the world and country. So I finally realized, hey, there's something about this particular ship that people in Washington have been on the ship, they've seen it, they understand it. And that's where I realized, hey, we're all the people outside of Washington thinking the camera is here when the camera is real on the starboard side, midships, where the camera is really port side bow. So that's what it finally took. There were experts figuring out whose expertise really qualifies. And that's a lot what we do at gCaptain. Figure out who is biased and such. Joe flatly says they're both wrong. How so, Joe? I would love to hear your opinion because this story's evolving and I apologize as we go on. All right, so that's my apology. What I'm not apologizing for is a lot of people who were in Washington and were on the side that we were wrong said, hey, John, you said that the ferry captain is not being irresponsible here. All right. Again, it's very, all right. Ted says, now it's all breaking up. Not hearing much at all. I apologize for that, Ted. Hopefully we can get this back through. But what I said in the actual article, and this isn't sea lawyering, it's not me trying to go back. I'm willing, more than willing, and I'm willing to admit I was wrong about the ferry. The ferry played a major part in this. But what I said in the original article, or my addendum to the article, was that the captain, from what I saw, the captain was not responsible. The captain of the ferry was not responsible for this incident. And people said, how could you say that? How could you say that the captain's not responsible when it was clearly a crossing? Well, I didn't know it was crossing. I was overtaking. But what I actually said, and this is why it's important to have, to read it carefully and understand the full text, is the fact that based on the current information, the video only, not having AIS, the captain is not responsible. All right? Not knowing the vessel layout design. Now that I know that it was a crossing situation, now that I know the design, yes, the ferry captain is responsible based on the current information I have there. The other thing I said, a lot of people said, hey, the boat had no fault whatsoever. I got a lot of email and vehement email and comments and texts about that original line we used, which was in the headline, calling the guy an idiot boater. Well, guys, I'm standing by that call. And many of you are going to disagree with me. Feel free to put the notes on the comments below, or you can email me, john@gcaptain.com. I've received a ton of critical emails today, and this is how I work through the story, and my team here works through it. So I like that. Feel free to be critical, but I am continuing with my thought that this is an idiot boater. And I'm even going to say the boater has primary responsibility despite the fact he was stand-on vessel. If there's one person at fault here, it is the boater. I know, I'm going to get a lot of criticism for this. How can I justify that position? Well, another comment that we've had frequently is this comment about security zones and vessel traffic service and a whole litany of other things that the boater did wrong. I don't know the Seattle area specifically, but apparently there's a 500 meter, maybe 100 meter security zone around the ferry that regardless all boaters have to stay away from. There are also vessel traffic VTS regulations there, and there were a whole list of other regulations. There was questions about the narrowness of the channel, and there were some that were flat wrong. Like the ferry, one guy said the ferry has street lanes and they have to stay within those lanes at all times, no matter what. Those are false. Some of them were right. The security zone, the DHS requirements for staying away from the ferry, it was right, but it's inconsequential, guys. The security rules are inconsequential because the failing here is at a coal regs level. And this is one thing that whether the experts were from Seattle or from the East Coast, all the people I trust in really, when we talked it through, a few disagreed at first, but as we talked it through, it came apparent this is a basic coal regs, rules of the road scenario. So we have the coal regs here, and I'm going to bring them up. So crossing situation is Rule 15 of the coal regs. When two power-driven vessels are crossing so as to involve risk of collision, the vessel which has the other on her own starboard side shall keep out of the way and shall, if circumstances of the case admit, avoid crossing ahead of the other vessel. So the boat was the stand-on vessel. The ferry should have moved out of the way. Absolutely. I agree 100% with you guys. Based on this new information, where the camera was, the AAS data, the ferry was wrong in the crossing situation. But I still think the boater was the primary idiot here, if I'm using the term that we posted. And the reason why is, despite all the security in the VTS, and none of that overrules the coal regs. The rules of the road are still the primary means we have of avoiding collisions at sea. So I continue to go back to the coal regs in this situation. I think the coal regs are the primary thing we need to be looking at. Now the coal regs are, I think there are 41. There are 41 rules in the coal regs, which isn't very many considering the complexity of ships, and then there are a number of annexes and interpretive rules. The order of these rules matters, guys. Some coal regs, they're all important, but some coal regs are more important than other ones. So as we go through these coal regs, you have Rule 1, application. That is arguably the most important rule of the coal regs. It says, these rules shall apply to all vessels upon the high seas and in all waters connected within navigation by seagoing vessels. That states all of these rules in the book pertain to all vessels. The boater, the ferry, they all need to know this. That establishes part of the authority of the rules. And then as we go down, we have rule number 2, responsibility. Whose responsibility is it to follow these rules? How do other rules partake in? Rule 3 is vessel definitions or general definitions. What's a vessel? What is a sailing power vessel? Words are important, guys. Specific words are very important, and we're going to get to that when I discuss the responsibility of a shipmaster in a few minutes. Rule number 4, again, application of these rules. How do you apply these rules in a normal environment? Now notice rule number 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the coal regs all reference the coal regs. They are the foundation of the rest of the rules to come. The next rule is listed as Rule 5. All right? But in reality, and I'm going to get some feedback on this, Rule 5 is rule number 1. Rule 1 through 4 is the basement. When you walk in the front door of the coal regs, you look at rule number 5 first. This is the most important rule. And if we go down to rule number 5, lookout. Every vessel shall at all times maintain a proper lookout by sight and hearing, as well as by all available means appropriate in the prevailing circumstances and conditions, so as to make a full appraisal of the situation and the risk of collision. Well, guys, whenever there's a collision, the coal regs, the rules of the road are written that both vessels are at fault. And if anyone can show me an incident where there was no citing of any culpability by the victim in a collision, where one boat was fully at fault, I would love to read that, because I have not come across that yet. The coal regs are specifically written to put fault at both vessels. Now, the insurance companies and all that look at it and they determine amount of fault and all that. But the coal regs itself basically says if you crash into another vessel, you're both at fault. It's like my dad when I was a little kid. You know, my sister would start yelling and screaming, and I'd get in trouble, and my sister would get in trouble. I said, Dad, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything. And my dad said, John, life is not fair. I don't know if my ruling is fair, but I don't care either. If you guys are in an argument, you're both at fault. The Coast Guard's very much that way too with the coal regs, all right? But as mariners, we have to interpret. We can't take them all at face value. When you're driving a ship, when you're commanding a ship, you have to make choices. You can't always follow all the rules all of the time. You have to prioritize what's important. And look out, that's looking out the window, guys. You have to look out the window. So we look at the ferry. Did the ferry have an effective lookout? Well, yes, they saw the danger. They signaled the danger signal, 5 short blasts. All right? So they knew that there was a collision ahead. Could they have done more to avoid the collision? Were they already at fault at that point? Maybe. But they satisfied rule number 5. They have a lookout. Now you can say maybe the lookout should have noticed it earlier. Okay, we can get into debates. But the fact is, they had at least a basic effective lookout where the boat did not answer any sound signals, did not make any attempt to maneuver or any attempt to communicate with the other vessel. Now you can say as a stand-on vessel, the boat should not change course or speed, and I may or may not agree with you, but you need to establish communication and do some sort of response, especially when there is a danger signal. All right, you don't know as a boater coming up to a ferry, maybe that ferry is disabled, not under command, something else. There is a whole list of reasons why a ship would sound a danger signal, and you have to acknowledge those signals. The boat did not acknowledge the signals. Now, what the reports, the local reporters, there's some evidence in the Seattle area that the boater was actually in the toilet at the time of the collision. Yeah, he had to go poo, guys. In number 2, he was in the toilet instead of on the wheelhouse. You would be surprised how many stories G-Captain in the last 10 years has reported on ship and vessel collisions with people in the toilet, in the head, at the time of the collision. It happens way too frequently, and it happens around the world. It is a global phenomenon, guys. There was one ship, the entire bulker went up on the beach that we reported, and it all came back to a thermometer in the reefer refrigeration unit of the ship. It was miscalculated. The beef was not being cooled properly. Microbes came in. The cook made a wonderful meal that everyone ate, and the entire crew was in the head. And no one was manning the ship, went aground. This doesn't just happen to boaters. It happens to professionals too. All right? But it's still no excuse for no lookout. He could have reduced speed. He could have dropped an anchor. There are some options. None of them are great. But to go that full, that speed in the bathroom on autopilot is just wrong. And so I stand by my thing that, okay, no matter what we do, they are both going to be at fault. But rule number 5, which I'd argue is rule number 1, look out. The ferry had, the boater didn't. The ferry, from new evidence, it looks like he was at fault. It looks like he made a mistake. He is a professional, the boater not necessarily. But whether the boater's recreational or not, that is, you got to look out the window, guys. You got to look out the window. All right. So I apologize for saying that the ferry wasn't at fault, even though that's not exactly what I said. But I'm not apologizing for calling the boater an idiot on G-Captain. You need to have a lookout. That is critical. And as we go down, rule number 6, my initial assumption was that they both failed at rule number 6. And in most incidents, that's something the Coast Guard finds. When there's an incident, they'll cite both vessels for not going a safe speed. Rule number 6, every vessel shall at all times proceed at a safe speed so that she can take proper and effective action to avoid collision. So if you had a collision, how the world's written, you by definition were not going a safe speed. Because if you were going a safe speed, that speed could be 0. If you were going 0 knots, you wouldn't have a collision. Now, there's some, you can get pulled by current, and it's not applicable in every case. But in the large majority of the cases, if you hit something, they're going to cite you for safe speed. And my first time looking at the video, I said, hey, what would I do different as a ferry captain? Well, the second you start sounding the danger signal, you need to pull off speed and put that ship in reverse. But as I watched it a few more times, you can notice the prop wash coming back. I do not know the exact moment the ferry captain put the engines in reverse, but it's very clear that he did. So he was at an unsafe speed, but he was attempting to make a safe speed. The boat made no attention to alter speed. He was not at a safe speed. So neither one was at a safe speed, but the ferry at least made an attempt to get to a safe speed. So we have rule number 5 and rule number 6. Rule number 5 goes to the ferry against the boat. Rule number 6 doesn't really go to either, half a point towards the ferry. And then we go to rule number 7, risk a collision. That goes to the boat. The ferry captain's the loser on there. But how do we weigh these rules? Now, the Coast Guard doesn't weigh these at all. You are in violation of any of these rules, you are going to get in trouble. You could lose your license. That's why I encourage all of you, and this is not a paid promotion, if you work on a ship, you need to get license insurance. And maybe I'll have an episode on that. But protect yourself with that license insurance, because if you hit another vessel, even if the boater is in the toilet when it happens, it's your license that's going to be on the line. You can lose your job. So license insurance, I'm a huge proponent of that. All right, so we have that, and we have the picture of the actual ferry. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about master's responsibility and some of the other comments that I brought in to that particular article and got some negative feedback on. So let me bring this back over. All right, one thing that I said here, why I am reluctant to jump on the master of the ferry's back and saying he did something wrong, even though he had a collision, and legally he is responsible. Legally, I had no qualms or hesitation in saying that the ferry boat captain is going to be found to be culpable in this situation. But G-Captain's job is we are not a regulatory environment. We are a media environment. Our job as reporters, as journalists, with expertise, with the Master Unlimited license up there, our job is to present the facts. All right? And when the facts get murky and things get complicated, our job is to provide perspective and to help unmuddle some of the confusion. And sometimes we have to editorialize to do that and jump in with our opinions, but most of the time we don't. But if one person is in the toilet and the other person committed rule number 39 of the co-regs and 41, I don't know what those rules are specifically, but there is, in our opinion as journalists, a difference in culpability, even if the Coast Guard finds them equally guilty. Because what we do is provide the truth so you can make better decisions on the bridge of your ship. All right, so yes, I agree. The answer to the question, we had a poll up for a little while, and I removed that poll simply because there were too many armchair quarterbacks. A lot of you guys were smart and knew what you're talking about, but there were some people who were voting on that poll really were saying the wrong things, so that's why I took the poll down. But the answer to that question is who's at fault is C, which we didn't even have. It's both. All right. But that's from a legal standpoint. From my perspective, and again, I'm going to get a lot of bad feedback for this, guys, and I know my opinion is not the only one. Please read the comments and get other opinions. But I believe that the boater was at more fault than the ferry captain. All right, as ferry captain should have taken evasive action prior It was a crossing situation. He made some terrible mistakes. That appears to be so at this time. But it's not as big of a mistake in my book, and again, this is only my opinion. It's not as big of a mistake as leaving the bridge with no one on lookout, no one on watch. That's just bound for trouble, guys. And that's my perspective as a journalist and getting the news and information out there. The last kind of thing I want to say is I talked about the responsibility of master. And I've been wanting to bring up this topic for a long time. What is the responsibility of the ship master? The easiest question on the master's examination that I took with the Coast Guard is you got all these difficult questions, but there are tons and tons of questions that say, you get in a collision, whose fault is it? It's the master. The engine it fails while you're going on the bridge. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the chief engineers or the captains? And the answer is always the captain. We all know this. This is hundreds of years of tradition. The master, it is always his responsibility. But where I see a lot of confusion, and this isn't just in our industry, it is in the world in general, is the separation of fault and responsibility. Now, people are saying, what the hell are you talking about, John? So I want to take this out of a maritime perspective because we all have strong feelings about ships and the authority of captains. And nothing I am going to say, I'll assure you, is going to reduce the responsibility of captains. But say you're driving down the street in your car, right? A deer comes out, or the fog comes in. Fog rolls in immediately, a deer comes out. While you're slowing down for the fog, you see the deer, you swerve, you hit a parked car. Our modern world, what we are told, what everyone says is that is your fault. You hit that car and you are responsible for paying damages. Now, why does this happen? Well, the TV crime dramas are big. They're in the news. Everyone is a lawyer now. Everyone understands the basics of law. And law's job, the responsibility of the court, is to find fault. A judge, a lawyer in court are not worried about the lessons for the future. They're not worried about preventing at that time, at finding the settlement of a particular case. They are worried about finding fault in a case. But fault and responsibility are two separate concepts. So if I crashed in that parked car because the deer came out in the fog thing, and there's damage to that car. Now, no one saw the damage. I have two options. Maybe my car isn't damaged that much. I can go down the road and hope no one reports it, and I may get away with it. Or I can stop my car and go knock on that door and say, I'm sorry. I hit your car. Now, that's another thing. Apologies are often bring with fault. And if you ever get in an accident, don't apologize because people automatically assume your fault. But that owner of that car, I'm at his door, he's probably going to get mad at me in 2016. I don't think that was the case 30 years ago because people understood the difference between fault and responsibility. Now, as the driver of that car, it is, as a citizen, as a morally correct person, I damaged the car. That is the fact. It is my responsibility to get that car fixed, whether I pay for it or fix it myself or come with some deal with the owner. It is my responsibility to fix that car, but it is not my fault. It is the deer's fault, right? And people are going to argue with me on this one all of the time. We see it time and time again with things at home. All right, I was just talking with a best friend. He said there was just a leak in his dishwasher, all right, and it flooded his floor. And he goes, oh, his wife says, the floor's flooded, my floors are ruined. You need to fix it. And the friend said, I was responsible. I went in, I called the plumber, I got the equipment. I ended up fixing myself before the plumber get in. It's my job as a homeowner, as a husband, to fix that thing. But she continues to say it was my fault. No, it turns out it was faulty plumbing and the type of thing from a previous owner. They had only been in the house a few months. But again, we have this thing that fault and responsibility are the same things. Ship captains always have to take responsibility. But that does not mean that they are at fault. It gets a little murky. You talk about the Joe Hazelwood, captain of the Exxon Valdez. He wasn't on the bridge at the time of the collision. Maybe it was his fault for trusting the third mate to be up there, Gregory Cousins. Maybe it wasn't. We've all had, as third mates, captains who trusted us. Sometimes a little too much. We've all had to put that trust in third mate. You can debate that. But the fact is the captain wasn't on the bridge and he had a qualified lookout and a qualified mate on the bridge, and they crashed. And he got in trouble with the press. The companies and everyone pinned it on him because he came out and he says, I take all responsibility for this spill. And they automatically assume that he was at fault because he took a responsibility, because that's how the legal system works. The legal system is in the past. Responsibility, and here's the big difference. What's the difference, John, between fault and responsibility? Responsibility is in the future. All right, so I want to make that distinction here. As ship captains, as journalists and CEOs and whatever your job is, we have to, and it's not just ship captains, we have to take responsibility for what goes on around us. My kid gets a broken leg. That's not my fault. He was at a friend's house. May or not maybe that friend's house, but it's my responsibility as a father to take him to a doctor and get him fixed. And I want just one thing to say going forward. And I'm saying this because I got in trouble with so many of the comments in the thing where I said the captain wasn't responsible because I had the perspective wrong. But I didn't mention that he was or was not at fault, guys. And a lot of people jumped on me and said he was at fault. He may be responsible and at fault. It's looking more and more like that's the case. But before we jump into conclusions, if we want to improve maritime incidents in the future, if you want to improve your career or your ability to be a good father, a good husband, it's very important to take full responsibility for your action. That's everything that's going to happen in the future. Whether it was your fault or not, your job as ship captain and as a successful person is take responsibility for as much as you can, but not fault, unless it was your fault. And if I just ask one thing of you guys moving forward after watching this video, it gets confusing. I know I'm speaking a lot, and I apologize. I'm rambling on, but it's been a very long day. I've been dealing with this all day. Very angry emails. I want to say, just ignore my words and think about, again, if we bring up coal rigs, rule number 5, I said, is rule number 1, right? Because everything before that just lays the foundation for the rules. But without a foundation, the house is going to collapse. Foundations are important. They just talk about themselves. And before we get to rule number 5, while we're still in the foundation of the house, it's rule 3, definitions. We mix words too much in this society, in this profession, in this industry. You have to use your words carefully. And I want you guys, after you turn this off and you leave here, to just think in your head, look up in a dictionary the definition of fault, and look up the definition of responsibility, and figure out the difference. I think this is very important for our industry and ship captains particularly, but anyone who wants to be a good and solid citizen. Understand the difference between fault and responsibility, because that's rule 3. Before we get to rule 5, which I'm calling the boat out, is definitions. Coal rigs only has a few, but that doesn't mean that other words, fault and responsibility, matter. All right, guys, it's getting really late here. It is after 6 o'clock California time. I'm going to look at the comments really quick and see how many angry people there are for this video. Again, all right, we have one of the people who just helped me figure out this. It was like, man, when I realized the camera was not on the starboard side rail, it was actually on the bow. It was that, oh, now I understand this incident. It was that aha moment. And Doug here helped me through that. Ted Sharon says, this is funny. Oh, thank you, Ted. Jim said, did he signal 3 blasts for reverse propulsion? No. Yes, when you're going in reverse, you have to do 3 blasts. But you can't, there's also, I don't know the exact stating of the rule, but your signals cannot be ambiguous. They have to be clear and intentional, right? Meaning you can't mix signals. So did he do 3? It doesn't matter. He was already sounding the danger signal when he put it in reverse propulsion. The danger signal, 5 or more short blasts, takes precedence over the 3 blasts for reverse propulsion. So I don't see that playing into this case at all. Drew Pine says, the ferry shouldn't ever have gotten in a situation where he was sounding the doubt signal anyway. Yes, Drew. But we all get into situations where we find trouble. You don't, it's one of my favorite quotes about the sea and ocean. And it says, ships, I forget who said the quote, but ships are safe in port, but that's not what they're built for. All right, you're safe as a captain as long as you're tied on the dock, but that's not what we do. That's not what we get paid the big bucks for. We get paid the big bucks, and should we avoid these? But yes. But when you find yourself in a situation that's difficult to handle, how do you manage that? That's what I'm trying to address here in this video. Ron says you are delusional, Drew, so I don't know if Ron agrees with me or not. Some back and forth in this comments. Marshall Kelly says VTS AIS makes navigators less aware of small vessels. The, quote, rule of gross tonnage is also a misnomer. Regardless of the excuses on both vessels, they indeed are both at fault. All right, I didn't bring up rule of gross tonnage because I didn't want to. Because it gets into horse nest. All right, it's the common sense rule. It is a rule that says if the other vessel has grossly more tonnage than you have, stay the hell away from it. All right. One of my favorite other colloquial rules, that's what that rule is you know the rules. Red over red, captain's dead. Red over green, sailing machine. When I worked out of San Diego with a lot of Navy boats too, we had another one like the law of gross tonnage. It was, if it's gray, stay away. A very good rule of thumb. But neither that rule nor the rule of gross tonnage is in the coal regs. You won't find the rule of gross tonnage anywhere, in any regulation. It's not a real rule. It's common sense. All right? And it's common sense that can prevent you from getting, it's one I mention every time I'm at a speech, I'm talking to boaters. Sometimes I'm invited to yacht clubs or auxiliary meetings. I'm asked to talk to boaters. I always bring it up. I think it's an important rule. But it's not there because frankly, the Coast Guard, again, the rules are written that both parties are in trouble. And if they had the rule of gross tonnage, that wouldn't be the case. So they are not there. VTS AIS makes navigators less aware of small vessels. I own a small vessel. I own a 43-foot catch, custom-built sailboat. And one of the very first things I put on that sailboat was AASB. You have the danger hour of shipping from 10 p.m. to midnight. Almost all the new third mates are put on 8 to 12 watch. And those new third mates, so that the captain's awake when he's there. The captain can respond quickly to any emergency with a new third mate. Well, the captain typically goes to bed by 10 o'clock, leaving 2 hours in the middle of the night with a lot of ships with brand new third mates alone with their AB. The new thermates, like it or not, they're better at computers than anything else, so I have an ASB on my ship, on my boat. All right, I think that's a good rule of thumb. But not all the boats show up on the AAS and VTS. Now, this isn't a new rule, guys. Small boats have always been difficult. Certain types of boats, certain material boats have always been difficult to see on radar, especially in confined situation. It's nothing new to the mariners. Seeing small boats electronically has always been a problem. The problem here is now as mate, you're expected to watch the radar, you're expected to look at the AES, and you're expected to do all the VTS requirements. It's the amount that you have to do in a short period of time that's getting people in trouble. So the short answer is, Marshall Kelly, you're absolutely right. And if you're a boater, I highly suggest an AASB. Now you'll say, oh, ships can cancel me out and filter out AASB. Yes, and they will in crowded waterways. But out in the open sea, especially I sail right, there is no harbor, there's just the ocean. AASB, if you're going to go out there to the big ocean, it's a great thing to have. Jim says, what am I talking about? The CSI ferry, the Washington State ferry. Jim, if you click on the title, there's a bit.ly link. Click on that, it'll bring you to the article that I am talking about. Joe said, I drag a dead deer over the neighbors as a peace offering. If you were my neighbor, Joe, I love venison. That would be a great peace offering. But the fact here is, going back to fault and responsibility, it doesn't matter if it was your fault hitting that car or not. It is your responsibility to fix it. It doesn't put you at fault necessarily. And when a captain stands up in court and something else and says, I take responsibility, civilians too often think it's fault. And a lot of captains now don't understand, and especially our wives don't understand the difference between just because I accept responsibility for the maintenance and the electrical systems and the plumbing in my house does not mean it's my fault that lightning hit us and wrecked all of the electronics. Fault and responsibility are two different things. As masters, as men, or as women, this is great for women too. It's important to understand the difference between fault and responsibility. I love that, though, Joe Flatley, peace offerings. Great idea. Martin Hawkins says, that boat Daydreamer acted like its owner was impaired. This is perspective. What was the problem here? Why did half of the master mariners, a lot guys who teach coal rigs, get this wrong today? And it was a matter of perspective. The camera was in a different spot than they thought it was. All right? Perception matters, guys. This boat's name was Nap Time. Do not name your boat Nap Time. All right? It is like driving down the highway with 23 legalized marijuana stickers and then getting upset when you get pulled over by a police officer. All right? The police officer may or may not think you're on marijuana, or, hey, man, just because my beard, but he sees those things and then it gets in his mind. We're humans. We can't help it. We lead ourselves to conclusions, and you're going to get pulled over. Do not put marijuana stickers on your cars, guys. Do not put political stickers. Do not put anything to make the cops think that you are anything but an upstanding citizen. Naming your boat Nap Time doesn't mean that the owner frequently takes naps when he's supposed to be navigating, but it doesn't add to the perception of responsibility at all. And perception is important, especially when dealing with investigators and law enforcement officers. Morgan Fanberg says, you can't see my screen. I apologize. I'm going to look into that, Morgan. Too much glare. Okay, that's a specific problem. That's good to know. Thank you for the specifics. Bill says, thanks, John. Maybe review and relate strict liability. That's a great thing, strict liability. It's after 6. I got to get home for dinner, Bill. Maybe a future episode, but this is your homework, guys. Look up in a dictionary, fault. Look up responsibility. Think of the difference. Then go and look up the word strict liability and think of how these words parlay. And when you're if you get in a collision and the investigator is coming to you, understand these biases. telling a investigator that you accept full responsibility is not going to be perceived well by the jurors of the court or anything else, even though that's the only thing to do as a responsible citizen. People don't understand the difference between fault and responsibility, and that's just something you have to accept, but it doesn't mean you have to be confused. Scott Rader says, is your camera possibly drunk? I want to bring this up. We're trying a new system here. Last time it was cut off half my face, so I'm trying a new part, but it's following me as I move around. All right, I don't know if it's doing it now, but it's following me. Again, we're not TV guys, but we're working on these situations. I appreciate this comments. Another comment I got from a few of you guys is, hey, John, your pupils are pinholes. It looks like you're on drugs. Well, you need a lot of lighting in video, so I'm just being blasted by huge fluorescent lights right now, and that's why it may look like my eyes, I'm on narcotics, but I assure you I'm not. And if you don't believe me, the license, I get drug tested frequently. All right, Robert says, the law reads, a large passenger vessel security and safety zone has been established by 33 CFR 165.1317 within Puget Sound. The zone extends 300 yards. I'm not doubting the fact that they both violated the security zone. I'm not denying the fact that the CFR states the security zone. I'm not denying the fact that the boat was acting irresponsibly, violating that safety zone. Absolutely, you're 100% correct. All I'm suggesting here, Robert, is the call regs take precedent. All right? As a ferry operator, as a ship operator, as a person who's listened to by a lot of mariners, I have to look to the future. You can't, if a boat is clearly violating that safety responsibility, you have to take evasive action. You can't rely on it. The co-regs are of primary importance here. And you're right, Robert, but it's not as important as the co-regs, in my opinion. Bill Brucato says, taking the master's berth requires assuming responsibility. Absolutely, Bill. That's just what we talked about. Assuming responsibility is something you need to do at all times, regardless of fault. And that's why we need to separate the two. A lot of times people go, I saw it at a restaurant locally in town. There was a burrito on the floor, and 6 people walked over the burrito. It was a tripping hazard. It was a thing. And then one guy looks at his friend and say, hey, why don't you report that? He goes, I didn't drop it. He thinks that being the one to drop the burrito relates to responsibility. He thinks because he was not at fault. He wasn't. He didn't drop the burrito. I saw personally. The burrito was on the floor before he came in. He thinks because he was not at fault, he is not responsible. Whether it's on the ship as captain or in your personal life, guys, that's why you have to understand the difference. I went up. I got the busboy. I said, hey, there's a burrito on the floor. Because if I walked over it, I'd be responsible for the next person falling down, and then I would be at fault. So take responsibility for your actions, and that does not mean you're at fault. It does mean fault is the past. Who did it? That's what juries are concerned. As masters, hopefully we have pretty clean records. We're not looking in the past. We are concerned with the future. Courts are past. That's fault. Masters our future, that's responsibility. And Bill is absolutely correct. Kelly Kernan joined us. Kelly Kernan was one of my absolute favorite, I think he was a classmate of mine as a master's program in SUNY Maritime, and then he became a professor, and then SUNY Maritime lost him to Kings Point, one of the best maritime instructors in the world as far as I'm concerned. Joe Flatley said, safe speed is key. Nobody remembers if it takes you an extra 20 minutes to dock, but if you bump too hard or collide, everyone won't forget. Again, rule number 5, which I'd argue is rule number 1, is lookout, primary importance. Rule number 2 is safe speed, guys. You're absolutely right, Joe. Speed is critical here in any collision situation, and that's why it is rule number 6 in the code regs. And finally, Robert Patterson said, so if I hit one of the gray ones, who is at fault? The Navy ships? If a merchant ship hits a gray hull, well, I don't know. I'll tell you legally, you're at fault, Robert. Because the Navy's friends with the Coast Guard, and it doesn't matter if you hit, you're both at fault, but the Navy doesn't have to follow the rules of the road. The Navy is exempt from the rules of the road. Navy's exempt from a lot of the environmental rules. They still use halon. We can't use halon. So that's one of the reasons I say if it's gray, stay away. You're not going to pin the U.S. Navy in the court of law. Absolutely not, no matter whose fault it is. They're going to say it's your fault. But there's also the court of perception. I talked about the importance of perception in investigations. You have to be perceived as responsible. One of the best tips I ever got when I became master, captain said, John, as captain, never carry change in your pockets or keys in your front pockets when you're captain of a ship. I said, that was very unusual advice. Why do you say that? He goes, if you get nervous. At times as captain, you get nervous. And if you're nervous and everyone else sees you're nervous, they're going to get nervous. All right? So you need to keep your hands in your pockets when you're nervous. And if there's anything jangling around that's going to betray the fact that you're anything but calm, cool, and collective, that's very bad for a captain. Again, perceptions, reality. And I'm going to say to you, Robert, if you hit a Navy ship, the perception of whether it's your fault or not, the fault is going to you, and the perspective from the maritime community, from your fellow masters, is that the Navy was at fault. That's just what's going to happen. Finally, Steve Richter says, crossing situation. Do you see a red side light or a green side light? I know it's daytime, but you know what I'm getting at. So it happened on the starboard side, Steve. The side light extends from dead ahead to 112 degrees or 22.5 degrees abaft the beam. So in this case, they would see a green side light, the boat would have. And the ferry would have seen a red side light from the boat. Finally, Nick Beam says, I like that. If it's gray, stay away. Great advice, Nick. It's one of my favorite that I heard many years ago working in San Diego. And if you take away only two things, understand the word's fault, understand responsibility and the difference between the two. Always take responsibility in all your actions. And remember, if it's gray, stay away. Thank you so much. This has been another episode of G Captain Live, episode 16, and we hope to join you again soon. Have a wonderful evening and good night.